Greetings. These days, there's always something to talk about in the field of UFOs or UAP. A couple of days ago, News Nation and its journalist Ross Coulthart introduced us to whistleblower and Air Force veteran Jake Barber. I gave an immediate reaction to that interview, which you can watch on this channel. In short, though, I found Barber himself to be credible and believable, although I did state my opinion that the interview itself was probably not enough to sway a skeptic. Now, there's a full interview of Jake Barber that has just come out. I will come back in my next program to offer my thoughts on how that went overall. But for this program, I just want to take a look at something else, and that is the idea of an egg-shaped UFO. Barber stated that he was involved in the retrieval of an egg-shaped craft. He said he came to within 150 feet of the object during a recovery operation. So this is part of the video that was shown to us during the interview. It now seems to be that this was not actually the video shot during Jake's retrieval of the craft, but another example of it. So at least that's what I've heard. So we can return to that issue in the future also. But as it is, this is still an interesting clip. I know some people have criticized it, saying there's no noticeable helicopter wash. I'm no expert, but I suppose I didn't see that as an obvious problem. We will have to let the experts duke that one out. Barber did describe the craft that he retrieved as white, with no visible propulsion. He believed it was not human technology. There were three other military veterans who corroborated his account, or at least corroborated him in different ways. So if that's true, this would indicate yet another bit of evidence of recovered non-human technology in U.S. possession. And I think his testimony is very challenging in a good way. I think it challenges the public in its understanding of this subject, and I think it's definitely adds to the calls for government transparency. I think all of that is good. After the interview came out, I saw all sorts of comments about this, some of them kind of funny. One person, aliens love to cook, eggs, Tic Tac, saucers, sausages. Someone else, we just got egg rolled, or Lego my Eggo, or call us when the egg hatches, and on and on and on. But, I mean, jokes aside, the egg shape that Barber describes is significant. The form has appeared in many UFO reports for decades. So seeing it again in this military account just further emphasizes the consistent pattern in UAP observations. I think the egg shape can very well indicate a specific type of craft. It certainly does seem that to me. I think we would do well to give it some focus in future UFO, UAP investigations and analyses. So right now I want to discuss first a couple of notable things about the egg shape in general in nature, and then in potential UFO craft. And then the main part of this is I would like to look at a number of historical examples, some quite a while ago and others quite recent, of egg-shaped UFOs. And then I'll have a few things to say in conclusion. So first of all, the egg shape is actually a very logical and useful shape for animals in nature, really because of a couple of different key factors. First, you have structural integrity. You have the curved surface of an egg. It distributes force evenly, makes it inherently strong. It allows the eggs to withstand the pressure of incubation without cracking easily. It's efficient in terms of space utilization in size. It has a large internal volume relative to surface area. It maximizes the space for embryo development with minimizing shell material. It optimizes the incubation in a certain way. This is what I learned. Anyway, the asymmetrical shape of the egg that you see here creates a larger air pocket at one end that improves oxygen supply for the developing embryo. It distributes pressure very well. This arched shape of the egg will distribute the weight of the incubating parent and neighboring eggs, so that helps to prevent damage. And it's a good compromise between a size, getting a good size, and the ease of laying. If you had something totally spherical, that would clearly make it much more difficult for birds, for example, to just pass the egg through their body while still having a large enough embryo inside. So the egg's really a remarkably versatile and efficient design in nature. Balances all of these things: protection, development, adaptability for all kinds of situations. And in fact, as far as UFOs, it's also not it's not bad. It's actually very suitable, you could say, for UFO design. Some of what I'll say here is speculative, but I think it's relevant. First, aerodynamics. It's similar in shape to a teardrop, which is very known for what is called a low drag coefficient. So that shape could potentially reduce air resistance during atmospheric flight, which would allow for smoother movement through different densities of the atmosphere. It has good structural integrity. Just like in nature, also for a craft, it distributes forces evenly, makes it inherently strong. So you certainly would want something like that. Potentially, it could be useful for energy field generation. So if UFOs utilize some form of electromagnetic or gravitational field propulsion, an egg shape might, I say might here, but it might be optimal for generating and maintaining a symmetrical field around the craft. Get into something like space-time manipulation could be very similar. If we want to speculate on advanced propulsion theories, egg shape could potentially create a more stable bubble for warping space-time around the craft. Again, this is speculative, but just saying. Heat distribution, it seems to be very useful, like during a high-speed atmospheric entry, an egg shape could potentially distribute heat more evenly across the surface. And a lot of other things here. Internal volume efficiency, just like with little chick embryos. Same thing for people inside or beings inside. Multi-directional movement might benefit from this. The symmetrical nature of the egg shape itself could allow for easy maneuverability in different directions without changing the craft's orientation. Stealth capabilities possibly might be useful for there. Pressure resistance, field cohesion. If the craft generates some sort of protective field or bubble, the shape might allow for better field cohesion and stability compared to shapes with like sharp edges or protrusions, things like that. So there's a lot of reasons that, some are principles from aerodynamics or from speculative advanced propulsion, what have you. But it's just worth keeping in mind that the egg shape very well can be a useful design for a UFO craft. So I want to go through a few examples of egg-shaped UFOs of the past. I used some AI generation for these. I tried to do my best to make it accurate. I think these actually are accurate portrayals. And I've found these cases through a variety of sources, some of them from the MUFON UFO Journal, some of them from the National UFO Reporting Center, from the MUFON, some from the MUFON database, their CMS, and a variety of places. A few I found from Filer's Files. Always love Filer's Files. So they're out there. And a couple are just known to history, which we'll go over some of those too. This is one from 1920, believe it or not. And this was from I saw this in a MUFON journal, and I think it might be from an old Filer's Files as well. So there was a gentleman named Clark Lynch, Linch, and he told this story a number of years later. He's no longer alive, but he said June 3rd, 1920, he was in his mid-20s. He was fishing on his father's property when he witnessed something that was quite extraordinary. So he said about 10 o'clock in the morning, he saw what he thought was an extraterrestrial spacecraft. He said, I remember the year because I'd gotten married in January of 1920, and it was my birthday. So there you go. So what he described was egg-shaped, and it landed silently about 15 feet from where he sat on a riverbank. It landed on the land, not on the water, as this image might indicate. But he said for about 15 minutes, it was motionless. And it was this blue color, as you can see here. So it was it just sat for 15 minutes. And he said, I wasn't in any hurry to jump up and run over to it. I'm glad I didn't. It might have killed me. Was his words. So just as he thought of approaching the object for a closer look, it just took off totally silently, he said. The only physical evidence was a patch of flattened grass where it had rested, which he said was undamaged, in fact. but he called it blue and translucent. He said it would have been camouflage in the sky. He said, so I've concluded that it wasn't anything from Earth. He talked about this, I think, in the mid-1950s, and he is no longer alive to this day. But quite interesting. I think it's quite interesting. And there's really no reason for me to say, oh, I think that's nonsense. Well, there's a lot of folks in the 50s and 60s, once the whole issue of flying saucers came out into the public, and they did start talking about it. It's not that unusual. Take it for what it is. It's a witness account after the fact. A lot of us know about the so-called ghost rocket sightings of the 1940s, 1946, mostly over Sweden, over parts of Scandinavia, and actually over much of Europe. Sweden was really the main area of activity. And there were, for a number of these, there were egg-shaped objects described. One in particular from May 24th, 1946. This is at 2 a.m. You had several Swedish witnesses see a wingless object. It was kind of half cigar, half egg-shaped. They kind of had both descriptions in there, so the egg shape was definitely one of the things. This was just 300 feet above the ground. It was spurting bunches of sparks, they said, from its tail. It moved at the speed of an ordinary airplane. So there's not much more to that, but this was part of the wave of ghost rocket sightings that happened at that time of year. And many of them, by the way, left no exhaust trail, unlike this one here. They were mostly always silent. They were often way too slow to actually be rockets. They were not rockets. It's just like when we say everything's a drone today. Back in 1946, everything was a rocket. They didn't really have any other point of reference to compare these things to realistically. Anyway, that was an interesting one from 1946. This one is going into my forthcoming first volume of USO history. This took place, we are told, in the Black Sea, which is where Russia and Ukraine are. Its borders with Turkey and a lot of other Eastern European nations as well. So in 1950, according to Russian UFO researchers, the Black Sea was a real hotspot for unusual sightings. One recently deceased Russian or Soviet researcher, Vladimir Ajaja, found at least 5 reports of UFOs or USOs in the area in that year alone, 1950. Now, one case stands out, and this is the one I've depicted here. You have the crew of a Soviet cruiser seeing an egg-shaped object rise from the sea. It took off without making a sound. These are often very silent. It left no disturbance on the water's surface, no waves, no ripples, nothing like that. Ajaja also he noted various reports from submarine crews, just pointing out they recorded all of these strange underwater movements on their instruments. Above the water, ship systems did detect these objects above the water, this object in particular, but there were others as well. So the Black Sea was apparently quite unusual and active in 1950s, probably continuing through the years. We get these reports sporadically, but I think they're quite interesting. One from New Jersey, 1962. I like including New Jersey. It's gotten a lot of attention because of the recent mystery drones, so to speak. But New Jersey's always been a very active area of UFO sightings, as a matter of fact. In 1962, this case here, you have 4 teenagers. This is reported years after the fact, so we don't have exact dates on this one. But you had a couple of teenagers reporting a large glowing egg-shaped object on some remote country road somewhere in New Jersey, don't know where. Object hovered about 20 feet above the ground, just a few yards away from the people. One witness, his name was Rob Baldwin, he said, "I'm not really sure how long we looked at it thinking back on it." And the reason, actually, this whole case was mentioned in a totally different context. The context was of a discussion about what they called the silence after the storm phenomenon. This is in a MUFON journal, where witnesses, I'm sure a lot of you know about this because you've probably experienced it, witnesses will not talk about their UFO encounters. Sometimes they'll just forget them for years and years, and then years later it comes back and they're like, how did I forget that encounter? So that was what this article was about, and that happened here. But nonetheless, that was in If you want to go back, if you've got your collection of the MUFON Journal, go to your November 2001 issue. It's in there. But an egg-shaped object. This is probably the most famous case of an egg-shaped craft ever. This is the famous. This one was not AI generated. This was off the Wikipedia page for the incident, so you just pull it. This is the Lonnie Zamora case. April 24th, 1964. About 5:45 in the evening near the town of Socorro, New Mexico. You have a police officer. His name was Lonnie Zamora. He was actually in pursuit of a speeding vehicle. When he hears a roar, he sees a burst of this flame, and there's an explosion, or what sounds like a crash, I guess, over a hill. So he's thinking, there's a nearby dynamite storage. I think he's assuming maybe that exploded. So he abandons his pursuit. And he goes partly up the hill, and then he drove partly up, and they walked the rest of the way. He gets to the top of the hill, and he sees a shiny object about 150, maybe 200 yards away. And he's initially thinking it was an overturned car. All these different thoughts are going through his head. I mean, he sees what looks like might have been an aircraft crashing, but he looks at this, and it's like, oh, that looks like a car that's been turned over. He goes forward to help, and then he sees these two little... he's wondering, are these children? He sees that the object is actually not a car. It's egg-shaped, and it's resting on four legs. And he sees these two small figures in like white coveralls near the craft. Are they examining the craft? Are they looking at maybe going to repair it? Who knows? At first, they didn't notice him. But when they did, they hurried back into the object. So Zamora's description, it was egg-shaped. It was whitish, or maybe aluminum white in color. It's maybe up to 15 feet long, thereabouts. It's on four legs, and he saw this red insignia or emblem on its side, and I think that's an accurate representation of what it looked like. So he's watching the object. It gives off a kind of roar, a bluish flame from its underside, and it just rises up, and it goes off at a very high speed without any more noise once it makes that initial noise. A lot of other folks came on the scene in the immediate aftermath, other state troopers. One whose name was Chavez. He arrives on the scene. So he and Zamora, they discover indentations on the earth. There's still burning brush where the craft had apparently taken off. This was a very much investigated case. You had all the UFO organizations, all the federal agencies came in. Very heavy documentation of the site, measuring, recording, all of that. And the Air Force actually concluded that there was no evidence of a fraud or hoax. And this case was actually carried as unidentified in the Project Blue Book files. It was the only combination of landing, trace cases, and occupant case that was listed as unidentified in Blue Book. Kind of interesting. By the way, I'll just mention 6 days or so after the Lonnie Zamora case, after that incident, there was another significant UFO sighting that took place. So the witness was the pilot of a B-57 bomber from Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo, New Mexico. So he's radioing his control tower to report a sighting of an egg-shaped white UFO. According to the UFO researchers that got this is James and Coral Lorenzen of the group APRO. Apparently, the UFO had markings either the same or similar, or possibly similar to the one that was seen by Zamora. The pilot claimed to be actively observing the object as he made his report. And as he continued to observe, according to the Lorenzens, the UFO reportedly landed at the base. It's a very big claim, I understand that. But I will say that the Lorenzens claim that they got this information from a very reliable source. Other individuals also claim to have heard about this story. There was a ham radio operator who stated that he monitored the exchange between the pilot and the control tower. A journalist actually did call Holloman Air Force Base about this incident. That's how much it got out. They got a denial, but the Lorenzens were adamant that they had 3 entirely independent, unconnected sources of information for the story. So another egg-shaped object. By the way, there was another aspect to that incident, which I'm just remembering. Shortly after all of this occurred, there was, this is a Lorenzen story as well. An airman, a U.S. airman, walked into a clothing store in Alamogordo and apparently blurted out an incredible story of a UFO being parked in a hangar at Holloman Air Force Base under heavy guard. And then, again, this is according to James and Cora Lorenzen, about a day or two later, that same airman returned to that store to insist that he'd made a mistake and there was no such thing as an alien spacecraft at Holloman. That's from the Lorenzens as well. So let's just put that out there. Let's continue on here. There were many accounts from the 1960s and 70s of egg-shaped craft. I can't get into them all. There was a famous one in France, a fellow named Maurice Mas in 1965 of a lavender field. He saw beings in an egg-shaped craft. There were many other egg-shaped crafts seen in the 60s and in the 70s. I'm just jumping here to 1985. This one comes from September 12th, 1985. This is Hawaii at Kawanakakai, Hawaii. About still in the afternoon, a little after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. An observer, one person, sees for about 3 minutes, witnesses in their hotel room listening to music, headphones are on, looking out the window. Very nice day, and sees an egg-shaped object moving slowly, about 15 miles per hour, about 150 feet above the water, totally horizontal in its motion. It was maybe less than a mile away from the witness. It wasn't that far. The witness then takes off the headphones, goes outside to keep watching, and it was goldish copper in color. Sunlight was reflecting off of its surface, so it seemed maybe metallic looking. It was totally silent. And, it was less than a mile away. You would be able to hear something, one would think, but there was nothing, no sound, no visible engine, no propulsion system. It was just a smooth egg. The witness was able to hear birds chirping in the trees, but not anything from the silence. So it's going slow, kind of in a northerly direction, and then it just disappeared from view. It's about 3 minutes. The witness said, look, I am a believer in UFOs, but I really tried to be very skeptical about this sighting. I tried to look at conventional explanations, like, is this a new type of aircraft? Is this a hot air balloon? Is this a helicopter, a blimp, cloud, whatever? But none of those really seemed to fit what was seen. So, and he also, or she, I don't know if this was a man or a woman, noted that, basically he or she said, I understand all the sounds of local air traffic. Like, I know what a small aircraft sounds like, a helicopter. Those could be heard from over a mile away. This one was distinctly different. So this report went into the National UFO Reporting Center, and you can look it up if you're interested. Interesting one from Tasmania, south of Australia, of course, from 1996. This was reported, or was occurred July 21st, 1996, and it was reported about 3 years later. One observer, maybe a 2-minute long sightings. A person, I've just got this, so I'm going to read. He says, I was in my room. I saw 2 lights in the sky. They hovered over me for a few minutes, and then I saw them shoot off toward the mountain. I was in my room about 1:30 a.m., as I was starting over. When I looked out my window facing south, a pair of bright lights came into view. They flew over the district at fantastic speed. I hurried out to the backyard to investigate. To my amazement, above my neighbor's house were 2 egg-shaped looking craft. They were red at first and then orange the moment after. I hurried into the house where I awoke my son. We were only quick enough to get outside to witness the craft flying away toward the mountain, again at fantastic speed. It made a whirling noise as it flew off north toward the mountain. That's National UFO Reporting Center from Tasmania. Again, you can look that one up. Very interesting. Here's one from England, from North Yorkshire, town of Richmond. And This one is also a National UFO Reporting Center case. No, sorry, this is from the MUFON Journal. So the object here, you have a witness seeing an object coming from the south at about 150 miles per hour. It was described as about 100 feet long, yellowish in color, egg-shaped, maybe about 50 feet high, and it gave off a blue light from underneath. So it's about 4 in the afternoon. It's hovering about 10 feet above a field next to a golf course for about 25 seconds. The witness actually said that there were sheep there. So as the object hovered above the field, we could see at least 10 sheep in the field. It appeared to be hovering above a sheep which didn't seem to be afraid. And that's all. This is from the March 2002 MUFON UFO Journal, which was part of the George Filer's column in that issue called Filer's Files. Georgia, 2005. This is in the town of Ackworth, Georgia. December 1st, 2005 at about 5 p.m. So it's wintertime, but it's in the south, so it's not like covered in snow. The main witnesses were a 13-year-old boy and some friends. They were in the backyard on a cold, clear day. So they see this egg-shaped object. It had 2 very bright yellow lights on both sides. I probably didn't get the yellow lights quite correctly in there. But the color of the object was described as highlighter blue. And he actually added that there was a trail of like gray smoke or maybe vapor trailing behind it. But it was egg-shaped. Total absence of noise. Again, totally silent from this object. He said, we only saw the object for a few seconds and then it suddenly disappeared along with the vapor trail. This was submitted to the National UFO Reporting Center as well. And then the last one that I have here from 2017 from Lake Havasu City in Arizona. This was June 2nd of 2017. It was reported the same day. In fact, it was reported almost immediately after it was seen. This was just for 90 seconds. You have 2 observers, and what they saw was a bright red egg-shaped object was seen flying overhead, going northeast. They said there was no sound. Again, like a lot of times witnesses will not mention whether or not they hear sound because maybe they're not even thinking. But it's interesting in these egg-shaped UFO cases, the witnesses are explicitly stating that these things were silent. So it really must have been quite striking, and it's quite consistent. So there was no sound coming from this. No blinking lights were visible. In 90 seconds that they saw it, 3 times they said a kind of red flare-like object was seen dropping down from the craft 3 separate times. So that's Lake Havasu City in Arizona. Pretty interesting. So you have a lot of interesting qualities about these egg-shaped UFOs. The shape and appearance. There's a very strong consistency among a certain subset of UFO or UAP reports that will describe an egg-shaped object. This is not an unusual thing. They are often, not always, but they are often seen as metallic or shiny in their appearance. They will sometimes, I didn't really get into this, but will have a haze or aura around them. And you do often, or at least a lot of times, you'll get bright lights associated with them, sometimes changing colors. Their movement and behavior is interesting, so they're often seen hovering silently, but they are capable of extreme rapid acceleration and very high speeds. They have been seen to make angular turns, very sharp turns that are difficult for us to understand in our conventional physics. They are sometimes seen giving off beams of light, or in the last case I mentioned, dropping flare-like objects. Sometimes you do get that. In terms of their size, they can be small, they can be large. They can be over 100 feet long, quite large. Sometimes they are described as larger than conventional aircraft. You do get some different types of effects from these things. So electromagnetic disturbances do happen with these, like they'll affect car engines or radios, things like that, EM effects. And you do sometimes will get physical traces left behind, burnt vegetation or indentations on the ground, things like this. Now, one thing I didn't describe in these cases, other than, well, a couple of times with Lonnie Zamora, and I indirectly related the Maurice Mas case from 1965. But you actually get quite a few of associated sightings of beings with these craft. Typically, they are the small beings with big heads and small bodies. Maybe those are gray aliens. Maybe they're similar to gray aliens. I don't know. But that type of situation does happen quite a bit. Witnesses will not uncommonly report paralysis or some kind of inability to move when they are in close proximity to these. Again, some of the cases I didn't get into that, but that absolutely is a feature. That did happen in the 1965 Maurice Mas case, for example. He was paralyzed. He actually thought that the beings were, he actually wondered if they were making jokes about him as well. They were doing some kind of collection of maybe local vegetation. They see him, they point like a stick at him, and he can't move. And he heard this kind of unrecognizable sound coming from them. You do also get some reports of missing time with some of these encounters. And you will also get like strong emotional responses. And this is not unique to egg-shaped craft, of course, but like intense fear or awe, or even sometimes an unnatural calm that the witness in retrospect cannot understand. There's definitely some kind of manipulation of the emotional being of witnesses, frequently, not always. So, this is a very interesting phenomenon. I don't know that they are necessarily seen in rural or isolated areas more often than urban. The ones that I have seen tend to be a little more out of the way, but I would hesitate to say that these are only seen in isolated areas. I'm not sure about that. We'll have to look at that. What we can say is that these types of UFOs consistently will demonstrate capabilities that seem well beyond what we know how to do, back whenever they were seen, or even really today. I mean, particularly in terms of the movement and effects on the environment and on witnesses. There's a lot of consistency in the descriptions of these things across different times, across different locations. When you take that and then you combine them with the often very dramatic nature of these encounters themselves, I think these reports are very, very intriguing and very important in the field of UFO studies. I would just add that. So let's move on. I think, when I'm thinking about egg-shaped UFOs, they tend to get overlooked in favor of more widely recognized type craft, like disc-shaped or maybe spherical craft. Even cigar-shaped craft, I think, are more widely known than egg-shaped craft. But these are a significant and I think very intriguing part of the phenomenon. I mean, I thought the 1920 sighting by Clark Lynch in Iowa was at least not unbelievable. I think that I could find him credible enough that I'm like, that could very well have happened. And then you get all of these other accounts. They're very distinctive objects that I think have been consistently reported. So you have a unique form. You've got a kind of potential high level of efficiency in the design, a kind of almost organic aesthetic, really, when you think about it. So I think this is a design that might transcend conventional human engineering. So it's an important part of the UFO or UAP narrative. The witnesses are credible. I think you've got military personnel, you've got police officers, you've got ordinary folks describing the same types of qualities. So I'm kind of glad that we're able to have an opportunity to bring some attention to this particular shape. I think the egg shape itself may hold real significance. And I think that in studying it further from the point of view of a UFO or UAP design and propulsion and so forth, that could actually turn out to be a very useful thing for us in the future. And I'm sure there are people who do study it from that point of view, but it seems to me that it's very worthwhile. I'm sure aerodynamic and other aviation experts and space-time engineering experts, if they're out there, I have no doubt they're looking at this shape quite a bit. They can go from silent hovering to incredible speeds and maneuvers. This is, UFOs in general are kind of a hidden chapter of our history, and these egg-shaped designs are not exactly a hidden chapter within that, but they do tend to get a little bit overlooked. So I think it's, again, I'm glad that we're discussing them here. So that's it. That's me for today. I'm glad to have this time with you. If you do like this video, give it a like. Do share it and subscribe to my channel. And if you care to follow me more closely, my website, Richard Dolan Members, has more of my work, has a great community as well. Thank you. Thanks for your support. I will see you soon. Let's keep fighting the good fight. Later.